Hello, hello. I hope that you're all doing great and welcome, welcome. My name is Harriet Khataba, and this is the Women Leadership Year-Long Tribute series sponsored by Her Story Matters, an organization that partners with women, communities, organizations, and institutions around the globe to provide access and opportunities for women in education, healthcare, economy, and leadership. So today I have with me an amazing woman called Audrey Tang, and she is a chartered psychologist, an award-winning author, a qualified teacher, an accredited leadership trainer, speaker, podcast host, and presenter to discuss wellness and leadership. I'm going to bring her on so she can introduce herself because I think she will do a better job at it than I would. Welcome, Audrey. Welcome. Thank you so much for saying yes to this
Thank you so
podcast.
much for having me.
It's lovely having you. Could you just share a bit about yourself? I think you would do it greater justice than I would.
I think you did a great job, and I was thinking, well, I'm looking forward to hearing this. I hope I live up to it now. My background is actually teaching, and that's where I did my PhD. I did my PhD on something called emotional labour. And what that is for teachers and nurses and frontline customer client facing professionals, the emotional demand on their job that goes beyond the knowing how to teach history or science or knowing as a nurse how to take a blood transfusion or something like that. It's the emotional expectation that people place on you for your role. So, for example, if a teacher has had a really difficult class and had a chair thrown in the classroom, those sorts of things, they still need to be, hi, how are you? Let's be supportive, let's be nurturing. And that can be
Right.
really draining. And so that's where I've covered things like burnout, I've covered emotional exhaustion, compassion fatigue, and all of those elements. And that's led me to write one book on management and helping new managers, but also now it's known as the Head, Heart, Gut trilogy of leadership. I wrote the Leader's Guide to Mindfulness, which is where we can clear the head space in order to think more clearly. The Leader's
Mhm.
Guide to Resilience, where you have to summon up your courage to make changes. And I'm just about to publish the Leader's Guide to Wellbeing, which is the heart of everything. And that's where we have to go beyond supporting people through well-being perks like a lunchtime yoga session. We really need to change the whole culture so it's psychologically safe and a place where people can thrive.
I absolutely love how you described it because that's what most people do. We schedule it like 1 hour every single week and hope to get the best out of it, which just doesn't really work. So, recently we have seen women like the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinta Ardern, admit to no longer having enough in the tank. And according to a collection of research put together by Zipper in 2023, 89% of workers have experienced burnout within the past year. 77% of employees have experienced feelings of burnout at their current job, and 21% of workers say their company does not offer any program to help elevate burnout. Like, this is insane just hearing the figures. So, what causes burnout, in your opinion? And why are we suddenly seeing these figures? And, the prime minister coming out and saying she doesn't have enough in the tank. This is something that is so unheard of. We would, years ago, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. So what is going on?
Well, definitely what's been very interesting is that probably about 10 or so years ago, people were posting on social media, oh, I'm on the golf course, oh, here I am with my 5 o'clock cocktail, that kind of thing. Whereas now, what they're actually posting is, I'm rushing from this meeting to the PTA, to doing my child's fete, to baking cakes for my friends, to busyness has become a badge of honor. And that is partly propagating this need to be seen to be doing the whole time. Also, on top of that, burnout, in terms of psychology, it is simply the body's response to pressure. It's the body's response to a prolonged period of stress. But what is causing us stress right now is comparison. We're seeing other people do all these things. We're seeing their highlights reel. We are now seeing things like cleanfluencers. Cleanfluencers are people who go around showing their houses off because they're so beautifully organized. And maybe as busy mums, you sit there and think, well, my house doesn't look like that. Oh my goodness, I now need to go and do all of that, as well as have my job, as well as look after my children, as well as do all of the other things that life brings to us. And so I think the comparison culture causes us quite a bit of a problem. The changes of what's been posted on social media, the people who are getting more follows, more likes, and more attention on social media, that's changed as well over the years. And work demands haven't let up either. Employers were not necessarily brilliant at looking after staff 10 years ago. That's when I did my PhD. That's when I made recommendations at that time that it's not enough to give people your 1 hour of this, whatever perk you might have. You actually have to change the whole culture. I said that 10 years ago. Why am I still having to say it now? So unfortunately, those things haven't changed, but the demands that we place on ourselves, almost based on society, they have got more. And with the pandemic as well, we are now mixing working from home. We haven't got defined boundaries of where work stops and starts. They can be added problems. Plus, the fact is everyone's talking a lot more about their mental health, which means we also have to be more mindful, and we're getting worried about saying anything in case we trigger someone or cause offense or cause worries. 21st century living in itself is not a happy place to be. We have to seek happiness, but we're probably too exhausted.
That is so true. And I think, you've actually explained it so well. We're looking towards social media to actually show us what success looks like, instead of deciding this is what success looks like to me. And also, I think some of the coaches, especially business coaches out there, have been, the business model that they've been sharing is not realistic. It is not possible to do all of those things. And all of those things are not necessary for you to achieve success anyway. So it's just about being able to choose what you want to focus on and then going for it. So definitely, I think social media has been a huge culprit. I hope it's something that going forward we can be able to talk about it in relation to leadership, and how to be able to use social media to model the new way of leadership. So we've discussed why we're seeing the figures that we're seeing. What is going on psychologically with anyone experiencing burnout, and how does this affect their work and everyday life? I mean, because I could be going through burnout, but I don't know. So how do I tell, or how do I identify it in myself?
Well, let's use my elastic band as an example. When we put our body under stress of any kind, we put it under pressure. That's it. So an alarm has gone off. This is Selye's very, very old general adaptation syndrome model of stress. So we put it under pressure. Then we prolong the pressure, because as long as that stressor remains with us, we have to keep that level of kind of high anxiety going. Now, the good news is, in this model, if the stressor goes away, then we can relax again, our body returns to normal. That would be fine if we were talking about evolutionary times where we're just running away from a lion, or you fight or flight, you're going to be caught or you're not. The stressor will go away. But the sort of stressors we're propagating now are, oh, why did so-and-so get that promotion instead of me? Or I've got this deadline, or I've got to worry about, did I actually pick my children up from school today? Those sorts of, they're going on and on in our heads. We don't have the let up. And so what actually happens is the body goes under so much pressure that eventually it just can't cope anymore, and it falls into exhaustion. Either it snaps, or it just becomes really flaccid and doesn't function as a body anymore. And that's when we get things like stomach ulcers, we get heart attacks, we get high blood pressure. So all of those physical ailments end up causing us to stop. So even with the best will in the world mentally, we may be too physically exhausted to do anything. But also, it is worth recognizing that recently we've all been saying, oh, well, it's been the pandemic and we've all got burnout now because we're overworking. There was a piece of research by the British Medical Journal that actually found that anxiety levels hadn't actually significantly changed all that much. If we were suffering with burnout before the pandemic, we were suffering with a similar amount of burnout after the pandemic. What did change was levels of depression. That was just very slightly higher now than it was before. And this leads us to talk about a new phenomenon, or at least a new to business research, called rust out. It's burnout's little sister. Now, rust out is when we're feeling meh, we're feeling ugh, we're not appreciated, we're not supported, we're not recognized. It's like our employer has left us out to rust. And that meh, that depression, that can also cause just as much physical exhaustion in the body. The body is doing this, whether it's overstretched, so hyper aroused, or hypo-aroused, underused. And so it's really worth recognizing that either or could be causing the issue. The model I use is the window of tolerance, and this was devised through trauma research by Dan Siegel. And the window of tolerance is where all of us have a certain amount of optimal arousal that we all like to function within. For some, if we've had a relatively supportive upbringing, experiences, it's quite large. For others, if we've had to always fight for ourselves and look out for ourselves, it's much, much smaller. But either way, there is a happy balance. Same thing if we give the analogy to appetite. Some of us have large appetites, but we can feel too full. Some of us have smaller appetites, but we can still feel hungry. And it's the same thing. All of us have an optimal, and hyperarousal, so exhaustion and anxiety, that can be just as stressful as hypoarousal, being underused, underappreciated, not seen, and so on. And that's causing us to leave jobs as well. That's causing us problems in work. So it's not just burnout, it's rust out as well.
That is fascinating.
It's because scary as well. It's quite sad, actually, because burnout, in a way, psychologists can help with that, because we can talk to people and say, why are you pushing yourself that far? And then you might delve into things like imposter syndrome, people pleasing, and so on. With rust out, this is largely an employer situation here. You don't need a psychologist. You need a sociologist. You need the person to go in and say, hang on, the system is not working. Why aren't you appreciating these people? Why aren't you promoting them? And psychology can only do so much.
That's right.
It's all very well boosting people up and giving people empowerment and agency, but if you then pop them back into a toxic environment, not a lot can be done. So we do need the input from the organization as well.
That is so interesting. So I'm just trying to understand how both sides of the spectrum would affect someone's output at work.
Yeah, because, well, you've got a new trend on TikTok, quiet quitting. Now, this can happen when you're burnt out. This can happen when you're feeling underappreciated. So this is where you do your bare minimum of work. That's it. I'm not doing any more. I'm not going to do my Christmas card every year, or my birthday cards for somebody's birthday due. And in a way, you can actually say, well, in terms of burnout, maybe that's not a bad thing. Just doing what your job description says, maybe that's something we ought to all actually do. But then you've got to think about people. We want to thrive. We want the opportunity to show off. We want the opportunity to be praised. And the Department of Work and Pensions, their research has even shown that work is a great place to get all of that camaraderie, support, recognition. And yet, if this is not being used, if this is not actually being appreciated, then we all start going, well, can't be bothered anymore. I don't want to do it anymore because I don't feel seen. So why should I? And productivity completely
lead to apathy, isn't it? And I can't imagine anything worse than apathy. I would rather feel something than not feel anything, because when you don't feel anything, I don't know where that would lead to. And exactly. I think just listening to what you've said and thinking about the people I've ever spoken to who felt like they were fed up with work and they can't really be bothered, I'm wondering if this is where they're at because they're not feeling fulfilled. And then if you're not feeling fulfilled, what would fulfill you? And then it leads you to the question, what would you want to do instead? And I think this is where now, when we're looking at leaders and leadership, it's so important for leaders to be able to understand these terminologies, because then you can be able to identify, you can be able to see it in your employees.
Yeah, Absolutely. I fully agree with you. But there is a danger with focusing too much on your passion because, we're always told, oh, focus on your passion. Well,
Yeah,
actually, if you think about it, is your passion now the same as your passion was
right.
3 years ago? Maybe not. And realistically, does your passion make money? Now, I know they're going to call, I think it's EKG or something, where you've got that link of what you're good at and what you can make money from, and there's a lovely balance. And great, if you can find that, wonderful. But there's been some really nice research. Well, there's old research. We're talking 50s and 60s research by Hertzberg. And Hertzberg talked about the hygiene motivation theory. And what Hertzberg said in particular was that the opposite of job satisfaction was not dissatisfaction. It was just a lack of satisfaction. It was just simply, I'm just not happy. But what gives people satisfaction are the hygiene factors, things that if they're there, they make us healthier. If they're not there, they make us quite ill. And those things include fair salary, supervision, security, knowing that you're going to have your job for the next year or so, not always going under consultations, and healthy relationships with our colleagues. But then what motivates us, which is a separate thing, then we need to have recognition. We need to have opportunity for growth and advancement. We need to have a sense of responsibility. And other people, Benjamin Todd has said, passion may not help, but actually finding things that work that fits into your lifestyle, work that's engaging, work that helps others. Those are the key things to look at. Even something as simple as work which has a lack of negative elements can be important. So be aware that when it comes to following your passion, you have a bottom line of living as well. You can't, sadly, we can't live on just joy of passion alone. We need to pay bills. And so we do need that security. We do need that financial input or whatever it might be, but we need to know what our bottom line is. Don't get too lost on passion either.
Definitely. I think you've articulated it very, very well. I used to be leaning. So I think over 10, 15 years ago, I was, on passion bandwagon. And after 5 years of doing something that I was really passionate about, I thought, actually, I enjoy it, but I don't want to do it for work. I want to do it when I feel like it because I'm passionate about it, not my 247 thing. So I totally understand that. It makes so much sense. So from your experience, do you reckon we as a society are ready to have this conversation openly?
I think we are having this conversation openly. Whether people listen to it, whether they really take anything from it, is another question. I believe we are getting better at saying what we don't like. We are getting less good perhaps at finding a solution. And I think this is a real problem because leaders will often say, don't come with problems, come with solutions to me. And that makes a lot of sense, because if all we're going to do is complain, then actually what difference does that make? How does that really help us? How does that help anybody else? So I think we are getting better at speaking about it, but I don't think we're quite so good at doing anything about it yet. And then my other concern, since we're talking about social media, is almost now, in the same way as we've got cleaning as a thing and weight as a thing and nutrition and nice food as a thing, we're almost getting curated vulnerability as a thing as well. Oh, I'm going to put a post up about my mental health. Oh, I'm going to put, and almost that's, we're sending a message that this is how to be sad. And that's, sad is messy. And it's allowed to be messy, and it's okay to be messy. And it's probably better to be messy in a safe space that isn't actually projecting it to the world. And that's a little bit of a concern of mine. So where you've got people getting better, there are some things which could cause an imbalance in the good work going on.
Yeah, and I think in a way it's kind of like we as a society, especially in the realms of leadership and top tier management, there's always been a culture of shame when there's no performance. So if you're underperforming, there's the shame. If you're not sitting in the office after hours, you're not hardworking, you're not putting your weight into it, you're slacking. And I think when we start thinking about really having these conversations around wellness, general wellness, how we can make a change, how can we actually tackle this culture of shame? Because it's really deeply rooted into everything that we do, especially when you start talking about executive leadership, because they would pride themselves in, I got here through hard work and long nights and sleepless nights. And actually, it's not the way. But that's what they're modeling, right?
Yeah, that's actually a great place to start. So I'm really glad you said that, because just because you tolerated something in the past doesn't make it good practice. So in the same way as people might say, oh, well, no one was there when I came home and I had to let myself in and I had to make myself my own dinner. And I feel so sad that that was your experience. But just because you were able and you were strong enough and resilient enough to tolerate it, and that's wonderful, and that shows your personal strength, that's great. It doesn't make it good behavior. It doesn't mean other people need to even go through it, let alone feel that they have to be able to survive it and get through that because other people have. So we need to be very careful that we're not propagating a behavior that is actually unhealthy. Shame culture, it can be dealt with by changing the culture in general, and it can be simple things such as having a buddy. So Tim's did a piece of research where organizations had always had somebody else to work with. They worked in pairs the whole time, and what this did was that always meant that someone was looking at your work and asking you about it, but it took away that shame or worry about anyone judging you, because it was a conversation. That was all it was. It was like almost an ongoing mentorship, but it was equal partners. One person wasn't telling the other what to do. They were just equal partners. So that's one way of doing it. Another way will be the employer going onto the shop floor. So actually having the experience of what is everyone thinking. I remember an experience that I had at one of the places I used to teach, where all of us as teachers had said, we're really struggling with year 10, really struggling with it. The senior leadership team didn't register, didn't hear it until one of them had to cover a class. And then they came in the next day saying, we're going to do something about year 10. And you just think, well, there you go. So you actually need to have people having that experience, so it doesn't feel like, well, you're just telling me, but I think you can probably get over it. That's unfortunately the mindset that you might have. So if we begin to understand it ourselves, that can actually make a difference. That can help alleviate, I guess, blame and judgment, and that leads to shame.
Yes, definitely. I have seen this so much, because one of the other things that I do is coaching high achievers, and it's kind of like there's that self-flagellation going on, and you're thinking, how is this working to your benefit? I just don't understand it. There's always this thing in the psyche, and I don't know if it's a collective thing in the psyche where people feel like, if I don't work hard, if I'm not feeling the pain, then I'm actually not doing the right thing. Never understood it.
Yeah, those very same people, if you were to ask them, what do you feel when something happens that's a success, they often won't say happiness. They're going to say relief. I feel relief. And what they're doing, which is harsh, it's a big thing, they're working to not feel bad. They're working almost in anticipation of someone having a go at them. And to me, that speaks to some kind of upbringing there, where they've had to prove themselves, where they perhaps weren't given the support that they needed, where their emotions weren't accepted or reflected back. And that's a really sad situation to be in. But that drive to keep working and working often we need to stop and unpack some of that and find out what is actually really driving that, and maybe what you're benefiting from it if you're not enjoying the success at the end of it, what changes you can make, but especially just really little tiny steps.
Yeah. So what steps and measures can we individually put in place in our everyday life to improve our wellness? Because I think it's up to us to improve our own wellness. And then what can companies do or put in place to support employees to reduce burnout?
Well, this is where you do have things like perks, and we can do a lot ourselves to look after our own well-being. And actually, it is important because there's a lovely quote from Martin Seligman, who is the founder of positive psychology, which looks at the science of happiness and the science of thriving. And he said, I would take depression and anger away from a patient, and I thought I would get a happy patient. I didn't. I got an empty one. And that is because the skills of happiness, of flourishing, are different to the skills of minimizing sadness. And that's really important to recognize, because if we go from not okay to okay, all we've got to is okay. When we're talking about well-being, we need to learn to be well. We need to learn to flourish. We need to learn to thrive. And so there are three key things we can do. The first is we can minimize the stress at the point of crisis. We can, outside the point of crisis, practice positive things to build up a buffer to stress. And the third thing is we can set goals so we can actually go and live our best life. So just as an example of each of those, at the point of crisis, there is absolutely no point telling someone to calm down, because they're not going to do it. It is going to make them more cross. But what you can do is help them get outside their head. And that might be doing the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, which the NHS loves talking about. And it's just simply look around the room right now, name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. And that guided look outside gets us out of our head, because what's going on in our head is this negative cycle of automatic thoughts. It breaks the thought process. For me, I like affirmations. Again, no point just telling someone to deep breathe. So what I do is just get people to follow the ball. So breathing in and breathing out. But if you say affirmations at the same time, for example, all in one breath, one of my favorites is, even if I can't control anything else, I can control my breathing. And so you breathe in again. It is, it's lovely. Another favorite affirmation is, I cannot save people from themselves. And that's another nice one I like reminding myself of. But it's getting you outside your head, because what's happening is that negative automatic cycle is just going on and on, and we need to break it. So those are things you can do at the point of crisis. Now, outside the point of crisis, Martin Seligman suggests 5 key pillars of promoting happiness. Positive emotions, so doing things that just make us feel happy. So that might just be having nice photos of lovely memories on a vision board or a carousel or on our screensaver. Positive emotion, engagement, really feeling in that state of flow. So recognize what it is that you love doing and do more of it. Healthy relationships. Now, healthy relationships, we all have slightly unhealthy ones as well as healthy ones. We've got those people who make us feel wonderful, who warm us up, who make us feel great. But we've also got those emotional vampires who drain us and just we feel so awful. So here's a very quick tool that you can do right now, actually. And it goes in with gratitude practice, so helps with positive emotions as well. A lot of people tell me I don't have time to journal. This takes under 30 seconds. You just stretch your arms out and you think of one person you're grateful for in your life. You stretch your legs out and you think of one thing you're grateful for in your life. And you just give yourself a shake and you think of one thing you're looking forward to doing today. And what you'll find is if you do that, say, over the course of a week, there'll be some things and some people that always turn up, and some things and some people that don't. And what you then do is you actively choose to spend time doing those things and with those people that always turn up in your gratitude practice, because then legitimately and without any guilt, when the emotional vampires come along, you can say to them, I'm so sorry, I'm already busy. So it gives you a lovely excuse. So that's healthy relationships. Positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, finding meaning in our lives. Now, one way of doing that is just thinking back to what gave you meaning when you were young. So think of an achievement, but think about what you loved about it. So it may not be the trophy. It might have actually been because you failed it before. So one of my achievements is my driving test. I learned to drive after 4 failed attempts. The fact is I kept going. Probably explains why I'm a teacher. So if it was just the achievement, then maybe I'd be better as something else. But it's not. It's the nurturing, it's the support that was important to me. So find meaning. And the last thing is accomplishments and achievements. But we're not talking about the big things. recognize the little wins that you have every single day. And if that little win is, do you know what, I actually changed the sheets on my bed today, that's fine. You did it. That's great. And so those are the things that we can build up outside the point of crisis. And the very last thing is ways that we can thrive. And so this is all of that positivity can actually help us in terms of creating a buffer to stress, but we also need to grow from that point onwards. So this is a lovely exercise. I want you to draw a circle and I want you to think about your best life. What does your best life look like? Now, for some people, you're going to populate that with different things. So you might say, well, actually, family is really important. It's probably about, that important. And friends are important, but not as important as family. So that's friends. And then maybe exercise is important, but it's even smaller. But maybe spirituality, that's bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe career is bigger. So it's up to you. What you say is you living your best life. You fill it, you populate it, you do how big things are. But then this is where the work comes in. You tell me on a scale of 0 to 10 where you are on all of that. Well, maybe you haven't seen your family very much because you've been working so hard. So maybe that's a 4 or a 5. Maybe you've seen your friends, so that's okay. That's about 7 or 8. But you've been working really hard, so your career's kind of like your 9 or 10. You maybe haven't been doing enough in terms of spirituality, so that's 4 or 5, and exercise, maybe that's really dropped off, that's a 2 or 3. What you know there is, if this is what makes us feel good, this is what makes up our best life, you can see where you're lacking, and you can see what you need to put a little bit more of effort into to just push it up one notch. You don't need to push it from a 4 to a 10. But the reason why I ask you to create your own size of segments is because you might go, oh, exercise is at a 2, so I better do that next. Family's at a 4 or 5, and family is so much more important to you. So that's the one to focus on. And so this tool helps you focus your energies in the right direction, because that way you know what it is you're lacking and what it is you have to do. And also it means that if you've booked in that time for yourself to do it, again, those energy stealers, those emotional vampires, you're better able to say no to them because you're doing something else that's active, but that's really good for us. So those are the 3 key things that we can do ourselves in terms of improving our relationship: deal with it at point of crisis, build our emotional and mental fitness outside it, and then find ways that we can thrive.
I like how you've done the circle shape, because I usually write it down, but seeing it in a circle kind of like gives more emphasis on, this is more important. And you kind of like, I don't know, it just gives it shape and, and depth and room. And you're like, oh, actually, this is not important. But when you're writing it, I don't feel it's the same for me as having that image.
I agree. The visual image makes a huge difference, because what we tell ourselves in our head is very different to really what's going on. And the brighter you are, the more your mind is going to be able to give you, no, you're fine. You're fine. You've got, and you can justify it as well. That's the other thing. Yeah. So having a visual, you can't get away from it.
I love that. I'm going to do that. I usually use the visual, but differently. To kind of like gauge where I am and how I need to improve, but never on what is more important and what I need to kind of like make more room for, which is in accordance to importance rather than improvement. Yes. Wow. Thank you so much. So from your experience and work, do you see a shift in leadership?
Yes,
because you do work with a lot of leaders.
Yeah, I see a shift, but I don't see enough of a shift. So what I mean by that is, I know I am getting more work, and I work in the field of well-being. So that's a good thing. That means some people are really getting into this and beginning to recognize that it's important. However, that almost reaches a ceiling. So it will be that leader for that team in that organization does it and can do it here. But whether it's fed into the culture, that is unclear still. And it feels very much like when I grew up in Hastings, which is a little small seaside town, and we had such a problem with the local council. They just wouldn't do anything. But as councillors moved on and things changed, slowly, things got better. But what we have to recognize in those organizations is those people who are at the top, they've been there for a very long time and they've done things that particular way for a very long time. They're going to be less receptive to change in the first place. So maybe we almost have to wait for organic change to happen before the bigger changes come in. So on the one hand, I am heartened by how we are moving. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah. So I guess when you were saying that, one of the things that has come to my mind is how can we actually measure the wellness within the culture of a company? Because when you're going to look for a job or when you're receiving a job offer, you want to be able to gauge the environment because we always look at, okay, the salary, how am I going to get paid? What are the perks and everything else? But I think it's also important to gauge the wellness, the culture with wellness in the environment. So I'm going to look for a job. What should I look for? What can be a telltale sign from the onset? Just things that really stand out to people who are psychologists like you, but would not to someone like me.
Well, there's been a very recent move to look at the wording of job descriptions, and little red flags have been things like fast-paced atmosphere and working under pressure and doing a variety of different jobs, very eclectic. Those sorts of words can make quite a difficult environment sound delightful. So be aware of that. Some might even say actually family atmosphere can sometimes be a bit of a red flag as well. It depends on what it is that you are looking for and what environment in which you thrive is also important. So for example, for somebody who does actually thrive in a fast-paced environment, great. Do you know what? Go for it. But what I would also always do is, if you can, go and see the organization, not on the day of the interview, because on the day of the interview, people can do a lot of things to make things look brighter and nicer than they actually are. But just go by if you can and see how people are on a day-to-day basis, chat to people, learn about the turnover. If people have been in that job for quite a long time and they still seem to enjoy it, then actually that's a good sign, because it shows there's that retention, there's that loyalty. So speaking to people and getting a feel for the vibe yourself is really important. And also, I would be aware of what you need in order to thrive. So often we're almost fed these narratives. You need this in your job, you need that. Well, actually, if you don't, that's fine. One key thing and this goes back to the very first book I wrote, which was Be a Great Manager Now. It's about job descriptions. Don't presume. Don't try and hide things like, oh, this is going to involve late nights and weekends and doing loads of Excel spreadsheets. If you dislike late nights, weekends and Excel spreadsheets, don't just presume that everybody will hate it, because there might be someone who goes, do you know what? That is exactly the job I love. So yeah. But as far as I'm concerned, great, come and work for me. So it really is a case of know yourself and know the environment you thrive in, and know the sort of work that gives you that joy, those work that's engaging, work that fits into your life, the things that Todd had said previously. If you know it for yourself, you can then be more aware of what it might look like in practice, and then go and see it when it comes to deciding to choose the job. And the last thing I'd add on that is, remember, you have as much power as the employer does. It's an equal partnership. They offer, you accept, or you don't accept. You've always got that choice.
Definitely. I love that description. Those are things I would not have actually associated with it. So if I hear fast pace, I'm thinking exciting, which is, I'm thinking, yeah, it's going to be exciting, but I'm not thinking about, okay, how does this look like? It might be stress, and so it's a really good way of looking at it. It's just how we connect the words. It's different perspectives, right? This is so good. I'm enjoying this conversation. What is your prediction? How do you see leadership change or look like in the next 10 years?
That was a really nice question to think about, actually. And I did think long and hard about this one, because I thought back to 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, I was finishing my PhD and I was making those statements saying we as organizations need to actually put the support in. It's not just about the worker themselves. It's a virtuous cycle we need to create. So if the organization supports the worker support the client will come back to the organization, and it's lovely virtuous cycle. And I'm still saying it, which kind of suggests to me not a lot has changed over the last 10 years. Then I thought, well, what has changed? Well, social media. That's been a big thing. So on the one hand, yes, we've got a lot more influencers telling us how we should live our lives and so on. But people like yourself, academics, authors, people who've done the research are also now seeing and finding, actually, I need a platform, or I have a platform, or I need to spread my knowledge and my information as well. And so I think we might see a little bit more of that, which I think is quite helpful, rather than the flashy things, which it's very difficult to keep up with, and we don't really know whether that's just been severely edited. So we're seeing more people with the knowledge that we might need coming to the fore. I believe that tech is going to make our lives easier in many ways, but I think it could make us lazier if we're not careful. So we've got wellbeing apps. Now, I was staunchly you can't do wellbeing on an app, but actually now I realize, if my watch is telling me stand up and walk around and I do it, then maybe that's not a bad thing. Or if it's telling me we're getting a bit stressed now, at least it's giving me that biofeedback. So, and then with some apps, such as meditation apps or vision board apps, it may be an easier way of managing some of those extra things that we want to do. So I don't have a problem with them per se. What I don't like is if we just become overly reliant on that to the expense of those one-to-ones. This is, like you said, you're loving it, I'm loving it as well. That interaction is a real boost to our energy. I hope that never disappears. I hope we don't replace those interactions with robots. I think that would be a real shame. What I do hope most of all, however, is that we begin to realize that all we're seeing out there is options. We still have the choice, and we still have agency to make those choices. The more we see out there, the more options we have, actually, the better it is. But I hope we learn that we can still choose, and as adults we can even say no.
Absolutely. I mean, I think because I left corporate years ago and I haven't been in that environment so much, but in the environments I've been in, I'm seeing a lot more holistic leadership where it's so human centric, and it is so collaborative in a way that really you can't really see the burnout. There's a lot more support. But I also understand that this is mostly women-led, or executives, organizations that have so many female executives. And I've kind of like seen this where it's a more nurturing, really building environment. So I really do hope that this is going to catch on in other sectors. I don't know if this is something that you've seen as well amongst the people that you've worked with as well, or
I think it will. It's the same thing as that organic shift. So the new people who are coming in have a different approach to mental health. People are much more open at talking about it. They're much more aware of the different ways we can support each other and help each other. And as that knowledge starts permeating up the ranks, I think we're going to have an overall much healthier workplace culture.
Yeah.
Whether that will be sustainable or whether something else might happen to change everything, I don't know. But I do hope we are moving the trend in the right direction. It just may take longer than we'd hope to get there.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making time to share your expertise with us today. To everyone watching, links to Audrey's socials and books is going to be listed. So go and buy her books and follow her on her socials. She is amazing, wonderful woman. And let's make wellness a priority. And until next time, this is goodbye from us. Take care. Bye.